Welcome to the Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Hosted by John Joseph Adams and David Barr Kirtley.
Hi, this is Dave.
And this is John.
And welcome to episode 17 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Today we'll be interviewing Naomi Novik, author of the Temeraire series of fantasy novels about an alternate world Napoleonic wars where dragons are real and are used for air power. Actually, when I was at USC, there was a student that I knew there, and she's good friends with Naomi. And so when these books first came out, the student Latifa told me, she knew that I liked fantasy and said that I should check them out. And so I looked at the website and I mentioned it to John. And so he thought it looked interesting. And so he got his hands on the first book and read it and really liked it and, gave it, I think, a really good review. And so at the time, I sort of imagined that I was going to give this huge boost to this new writer, having this really positive review come out. And it was really staggering how quickly Naomi went from a brand new author to just a huge superstar. And probably I think that review didn't have a whole lot to do with that.
Yeah, I mean, actually, in her first, the first year that her books came out, the first three all came out in the same year. So, I mean, that had a lot to do with her sort of early success, I think, just because, fans were able to sort of pile on, and see the three different books all in the store, made it seem less like a new author. But also, she got nominated for the Hugo and the Campbell in that first year, and she won the Campbell Award, so that didn't hurt. But I love those books. Actually, I have very little time to read novels these days, just because I'm reading so much short fiction, and she's one of the few authors who have actually made the time to read her new books as they've come out. So I have read everything that she's written so far.
But yeah, I mean, she has just become a huge star really quickly. But she did spend 10 years in the fan fiction trenches honing her skills, so it's not like she just completely came out of nowhere. There's kind of a joke in entertainment. What does it take to become an overnight success? And the answer is about 10 years. And so we'll be talking to Naomi about some of her fan fiction projects. She's also the head of an organization called the Organization for Transformative Works that sort of promotes for fan-created artwork. She was also a programmer on the Neverwinter Nights computer RPG. So just lots of great geeky stuff. And that we're just really looking forward to talking to her about. Oh, and then stick around after the interview when John and I will be talking about dragons and killing them. Oh, and our thoughts about the new How to Train Your Dragon movie that just came out.
All right, let's get Naomi on the phone.
Hello.
Hi, it's Dave and John from Geek's Guide to the Galaxy.
Hi, it's Naomi.
Thanks for joining us on the show.
My pleasure.
Okay, so first of all, could you tell us what were some of your favorite books from your childhood and teenage years?
When I was very little, my mother is from Poland and my parents spoke Polish at home. So she actually started me out reading Polish fairy tales. And so I grew up on these sort of beautiful, fanciful fairy tales that frequently starred girls in leading roles. Those were always my favorites. And not sort of the Disney princess kind of girls. These were typically girls who were like the heroines of the story. They would go out and have an adventure themselves. I remember at quite a young age, my mom got me the beautiful sort of enormous illustrated version of The Hobbit that had the art based on the movie, on the animated movie. Then The Lord of the Rings actually came fairly early. I completely missed about 3/4 of it, I think, the first few times I read it. I remember Tamora Pierce's Alana books. A Wizard of Earthsea, I remember reading at that age. Robin McKinley's Hero in the Crown and the Blue Sword. Patricia McKillip's Riddlemaster of Head trilogy. Susan Cooper's The Dark is Rising.
So you went on to study literature at Brown University. What was that like? And would you encourage aspiring writers to major in English or something else instead?
The reason that I chose Brown was because Brown did not have a required core curriculum. It let you really shape your own educational experience. And I think that particular process, I didn't go in necessarily intending to major in English. I wanted to be a journalist at the time, or more specifically, I wanted to be Lois Lane. Let's be honest. And I kind of went in and started taking just all the classes that interested me, that excited me, that I could get my hands on. And in the course of that, I sort of ended up taking a lot of English courses because I love literature. So I kind of ended up with an English major at the end, but along the way I was going to be an political science major, international relations. At one point I considered dual majoring in French. At one point I considered dual majoring in biology. For me, at least, I found that process of exploring a whole range of different fields actually was incredibly useful training for a future as a writer.
So if you wanted to be Lois Lane, what's your favorite incarnation of Superman that sort of inspired you to want to be Lois?
I was reading the comics, those the Silver Age comics. Although, this is really quite funny. It wasn't that I never actually particularly liked Superman. Lex Luthor was always my favorite. Lois and Lex those were the characters that I liked. And found exciting and intriguing. And in fact, I remember being quite irritated at both the comic on a sort of meta level, because I was like, there is no way Lois Lane does not know.
But he's wearing glasses.
Yeah, right, exactly. Nobody could ever see through that astonishing disguise. And so actually when I was in college, I think was when they rebooted the series with the Man of Steel miniseries. And I remember really liking that because it made me very happy, because it kind of got away from this really sort of terrible thing where Superman was this kind of creepy, weird jerk who lied to Lois Lane all the time. And Lois was apparently oblivious.
So did you ever write any Superman fan fiction?
Oh, yes. I've written Smallville, actually. I wrote a lot of Smallville fanfic. I've written in, I think, at least 43 different fandoms. I've written some Sherlock Holmes fan fiction. My first ever piece of fan fiction, which I think is mercifully lost to the world, was for Phantom of the Opera. And then I wrote some really terrible fan fiction for Star Trek The Next Generation when I was in college.
Would you encourage other aspiring writers to write fanfic, and what are some of the pros and cons of writing fanfic versus inventing new characters and worlds and stuff?
I would say I would encourage people to write fanfic if they like the idea of writing fanfic. I actually had this question at Icon this past weekend. Somebody I was mentioning that fanfiction was certainly very useful for me as letting me hone my writing ability and creative writing ability and skills. And somebody down the table was like, fan fiction. Why would anybody do that instead of, writing their own things and sending off the story for publication for money? And I turned to the guy and said, do you play an instrument? And he's like, I play the piano. And I'm like, well, why aren't you at Carnegie Hall right now? If somebody is thinking, I want to become a published pro writer, fan fiction can still potentially be useful, but fan fiction really needs passion behind it. And that's what I think. If you do like writing fan fiction, you certainly shouldn't keep yourself from doing it in the feeling that, you're wasting your time.
Would you consider writing an actual licensed story in some universe? And if so, do you have one that's a sort of dream project for you?
I wouldn't say that I'd never do it, but just economically, if I'm doing work for money, it makes much more sense for me to make IP that I own myself. One of the pleasures of writing fan fiction is that you don't work to a deadline. The story can be as long as you feel it should be. If you get bored and, if you're writing a work in progress and you're like, I've lost the thread of this, or if the story kind of gets stuck, you don't have to sort of force yourself through it. You put it aside and you can come back to it later. What makes, I think, professional writing professional is that you have to do it as work. So it would probably be unlikely that I'd do a professional tie-in unless something really amazing was offered to me. I'd certainly consider it for something like, I think there have been some interesting things done with Superman and DC novels in particular. Universe novels, but yeah, that would probably I'd have a hard time thinking of what it is that I would take on as a professional project, because I have too many ideas of my own. So,
Okay, so now you worked as a programmer on the game Neverwinter Nights. How did you get into programming games, and how'd that influence your writing?
So my senior year in college, I got started to get more interested in computers, partly because I was getting interested in fandom and spending time, online. And then after I graduated, my first job was kind of a jack of all trades position where I got to really do kind of whatever I wanted. It was a startup office. So I got to do a little systems work. I got to do a little coding, and I really was enjoying it. So I decided to go back and start taking some classes part-time. And I liked the idea of working on computer games because it felt like the perfect match of creativity and technical halves of my brain. And that's really, I was basically working on, I had finished my master's and had finished up the coursework for a PhD when the offer to work on Neverwinter Nights came along, and it was just wildly exciting, much more so than a dissertation. And I sort of jumped ship and went for that.
How did working on the video games, did that influence your writing at all?
Yes, absolutely. Before I worked on Under and Tide, I had been writing pretty much short vignettes only. I wrote under 5,000 words. Pretty much everything that I wrote was short. And, it was sort of what I was doing in my spare time between homework assignments, essentially. And then I worked on Under and Tide, and in addition to being a programmer, I was able to participate in the design of the actual gameplay. And working on the design of how you get 30 hours of gameplay really taught me a lot about how to structure a longer work of fiction as well, because that's really kind of what you need to do when you're creating a role-playing game, is basically come up with a storyline that many people can play through for quite a long time. And that was really valuable to me in terms of learning how to structure a longer work. And without even intending to, after that, I found that my story started to get longer. I was getting more interested in plot and writing longer, more intricate plots. And I sort of felt like I suddenly had the tools to do that with.
How did you actually get the job offer to work on the game? Did you write any of those fan created modules and you sort of came to their attention, or how did that happen?
No, it was just, one of those who kinds of things. A friend of ours was Rick Ernst, who was working as part of Floodgate Entertainment, and he knew that I was both a programmer and interested in gaming, and asked me if I'd like to join the team, and I said sure, and that was it.
Well, that worked out well.
I will say that it's one of the problems, I think, with the computer game industry, that there isn't a clear path into it for a lot of people if you don't know somebody. And that's something that particularly hampers girls, I think, and women from getting involved in the industry and in module creation. And that's obviously there are all sorts of reasons why it's a difficult field for women to be in, but that's part of it, or at least it was. I mean, things have certainly changed, and I haven't been involved in that world for several years. But
what are some of your favorite video games that you didn't work on?
Well, very recently I just finished playing Dragon Age, Age of Origins, which I enjoyed quite a bit, and Oblivion was the one before that. I really like RPGs, period, but I tend to like RPGs that really have a strong story and immersive environment. I think I liked Oblivion a bit more in that I felt like it kind of invited you to sort of really feel that you were your character and sort of integrated you into the world, and gave you such enormous freedom. I remember just there were scenes where you're on the horse riding through the countryside, and it's just seamless and it's just amazing. But I liked the henchmen in Dragon Age quite a lot. The design of those was just really well done. They really felt like people and like characters.
So what was the process like of writing your first book from the time you first got the idea to the time the book actually appeared?
Manic terror that I was going to not finish it. I wrote the first Temeraire in a little bit over 2 months. The first draft, obviously. because I was so, I was like, this is the longest thing I've ever written. It's the first sort of really original work. I found it really compelling to write. I was excited. I wanted to sit down at the computer for 8 hours a day and just bang away at it. But I was totally, am I going to be able to do this? Was my fear. And so then when I was able to do it, I was very excited. And I've calmed down a little bit since then. So now I take 3 months for a first draft.
And so how'd you go about getting it published? I mean, what was that process like?
This is the part where every first-time author, brings out the pitchforks and the torches. And my husband, Charles Ardai, who is himself a wonderful, celebrated, award-winning author, his first job at the age of 17 was working for Cynthia Manson at Asimov's. And she later on went on to become an agent and remained a close friend. She was at our wedding. And so when I wrote the book, she was the person that I sent it to. So I basically was sort of like, is this any good? Is this going to be saleable? And she had not handled science fiction at all before then. She normally handles mostly thrillers. So as an agent. So she, however, had a good friend, Betsy Mitchell, at Del Rey, and she sent it to Betsy kind of, I think she was sort of sending it to Betsy in the sense of, is this any good? Because she didn't know herself, and Betsy said, yes, and can we have 2 more? And that was basically it. I don't think I'd finished, I hadn't finished the book when I sent it to Cynthia. I'd sent her the first 50,000 words. And by the time we heard back from Betsy, I had finished the rest, so I could send her the rest of the manuscript. And very, very quickly, we signed the first 3-book deal.
So you mentioned that you're married to Charles Ardai. What's it like living with another writer, and do you show him your works in progress, or do you keep that separate?
Oh no, it's for me it's wonderful. I love being edited. I would show people things
just like people on the street,
paragraph by paragraph, not necessarily people on the street, but people whose literary judgment I trust. I would show things in as small chunks as they would take them. And Charles is a wonderful editor and a wonderful plotter, so I pretty much pitch him my stories very often, and so it's great for me. Charles, on the other hand, hates revising, and I always want revisions. So I don't know if it's as wonderful for him, but for me it is wonderful. And so and it's great because we have our computers in the same room, and we sit together in our office and sit for hours and hunched over our keyboards deep into the hours of the night, and then occasionally we look up and are like, hi.
So your Temeraire series was optioned by Peter Jackson. How did that come about?
My agent, Cynthia, sent it to an agent that she works with in California, Joel Gottler, and he got it to Peter. And they came back, and one day there was just a phone call, and I don't know that I actually... I think they'd mentioned several different directors as it going to, and it wasn't the sort of thing that I kind of gave credence to, because I sort of assumed that you send it off into the Hollywood, which is like this, supermassive black hole in the distance, and then you forget about it. And then one day this call came out of the blue, and they said, Peter Jackson wants to option all 3 books. And I was like, okay. And I ran around screaming. But yeah, the option has a long term on it, but I obviously am really excited for them to work on it. He's talked about it a little bit in interviews, the different things that he's considering doing with it. And we'll see what happens. I mean, I loved what it did in Avatar for the flying beasts. So I'm really excited to see what they come up with for Temeraire.
And you had to keep it secret for quite a while, right? After you got the news?
Oh, yes. No, because it took almost a year to just get the contract signed.
Huh.
Yeah, no, I mean, I have to say it's...
So, were you just sitting in conversations with people and you're just, like, shaking because you want to tell them? And
I told like, the people closest to me. My family knew, and Charles knew, and obviously, and, like, my best friend knew, but that was basically it. And, for the first couple of weeks, yes, and then you sort of forget that it's happening and go on with your life, because otherwise you just go crazy. And that's kind of my general philosophy about the project as a whole. It's like, what I can do is just keep enjoying writing the books and the characters, and hopefully one day I get to see them on the screen.
So what did you think of Peter Weir's Master and Commander movie? And do you imagine a Temeraire movie looking kind of like that, or do you have something different in mind?
Oh, I adored Master and Commander. In fact, I should clarify, the first time I saw it, Charles and I walked out and we were like, it was nice. I appreciated the authenticity of it, and I liked the characters. I sort of felt like, but I don't know that the movie was sort of necessarily satisfying as kind of a narrative. There didn't feel like there was enough at stake in that particular episode of the series. And that was kind of my feeling as I first came out of it. But I was like, but I like those characters. And then I picked up a couple of the books, and then I picked up all the rest of the books, and then I saw the movie 3 more times. And it sort of caught me in a way. And I love the authenticity of it. I certainly hope that the movies capture that feeling of the period, and that sense of realism, that these are people living in a real and harsh and difficult environment and difficult conditions, and then add dragons to that in feeling the same kind of way. Like, for me, the dream would be if the dragons felt as real, as sort of tactile, as believable as the ship and the experiences in that movie did. And I think that's an enormous challenge, but I certainly can't complain about the director who's got it. So
so what kind of historical research do you do for your books to sort of make them feel that same kind of authenticity?
I read a lot, basically. That's the short answer. I frequently start on Wikipedia, and I use Amazon reviews. I tend to look at the reviews on Amazon of bad books on a particular topic, because people get annoyed at the bad books and recommend other ones. Amazon's sort of like, if you like this book, you might be interested in these. Recommendations are also really useful for kind of quickly finding the best books available on a topic, easily available. Obviously, there's a lot of books that are out of print that are hard to get, but a lot of things that are available more easily. That's a great way to find them.
Was there like 1 or 2 books in particular that you thought were really great for, giving you a good idea of what the Napoleonic era was like?
The Napoleonic era was a little easier for me in that I'd been a sort of buff. I love history. I love reading about history. And particularly, I was sort of a Napoleon fangirl. So I already knew quite a lot about that period. I would say certainly one of the most valuable books for me was the Military Atlas of the Napoleonic Wars, which basically shows you each battle, shows you the troop movements over the course of several days, really describes in detail exactly how the maneuvering was going on, because that was something that totally did not interest me before I started doing research. Nelson's Navy is a fantastic book, and there's a great book called Life in the Georgian City, and I would say those are all fantastic books for the period.
There was a book you mentioned too, I think, where it was all letters written by people.
Oh yes, Every Man Will Do His Duty is an anthology of first-person accounts. It's not just letters; it's also sort of autobiographical narratives and memoirs, but it's all primary sources, and that's really some of the most useful stuff you can get.
And you do some traveling too, sort of as research.
Oh, absolutely. When I can, I like to. What I most like to do is kind of have a draft, or at least an outline, and kind of know where my story's going and where the key places are, and then traveling there in a more directed way.
Have there been any sort of funny experiences you've had, or things that surprised you while you were traveling?
An elephant knocked down a tree almost on our tent in Africa. That was certainly invigorating as an experience. These were sort of pitched tents, and they give you a horn to blow if there's an emergency, which they explained was if the animals come into the tent. But the elephant knocked down the tree. The top of the tree landed just outside sort of the little window of the tent, and then the elephant came over, because the reason they knocked down the trees is so they can eat the tops. So it was standing literally about 2 feet outside the tent. crunching this tree, and it's a big elephant with like tusks, and we're sort of peering out the window with a flashlight, like that scene in Jurassic Park with the Tyrannosaur and the kids like shining the flashlight in its face. And yeah, you remember when you're watching that movie, you're like, "What are you doing, you stupid children?" And let me tell you, when you're inside the tent and there's something loud and large outside munching, you shine the flashlight out. And it just stayed there. And we started thinking, well, what if it knocks down another tree? I mean, I really didn't think the elephant was measuring the trees to make sure that the tree wouldn't actually hit the tent. So we blew the horn, and the camp staff came and they chased the elephant away, and they came to us in sort of this like, oh, silly tourists attitude. We're like, everything was fine. The elephant wasn't actually in your tent. Which, first of all, once the elephant is in the tent, I don't know that I'm blowing the horn. I think I'm screaming loudly and running for my life. And secondly, and we were like, well, all right, well, why didn't you just come and tell us that it was okay and not to worry? Because we'd had to blow the horn like 5 or 6 times before anybody stirred. And they said, well, we couldn't because there was an elephant in the way, and the elephant is dangerous.
So did that inspire you to have the dragons take vengeance on elephants in the books?
Yeah, well, apparently there's also a legend of Ethiopian dragons, an Ethiopian kind of mythical beast that eats elephants. But it also just generally seemed to me that dragons think elephants were delicious. What better animal to cultivate if your dragon is going to become, if dragons are going to make an agrarian sort of cattle herding society. I think they're going for the elephants. It's bang for the buck.
So when you went about creating your dragons, how much did you draw on previous stories, and how much was just your own imagination?
Part of the thing that mostly shaped my particular dragons was a combination of wanting to preserve the feel of realism. Obviously, I want people to suspend disbelief enough to accept the existence of dragons, and you can't look too closely at how they fly and where all the food comes from and little details like that. But I wanted it to feel on sort of a moment-to-moment level quite realistic. So I didn't want them to be magical. I did want them to have to eat and get tired and reflect sort of the physical reality of animals in the world. So I really kind of thought about that. I looked up what information we have, sort of the best guesses of scientists about dinosaurs, like pterodactyls, and sort of just physical measurements to kind of give me constraints on the size and the speed that dragons could fly. And that really kind of is what governed it within the context of, the 5 billion dragon stories that are out there, which I really love and which absolutely have influenced me.
So you're the head of the board of the Organization for Transformative Works, which promotes fan-created art. What are some of the issues surrounding fan fiction today, and what do you think can be done to improve the situation?
Actually, with fan fiction, we're actually pretty confident that there isn't a huge issue in fan fiction, that it's mostly a misunderstanding. There are a lot of writers who are unnecessarily afraid that it hurts them to have fan fiction being written, that it puts them at risk. It pretty much doesn't. And so we're trying, on the fan fiction side, I think the most important thing that we're doing is we're building an open source software package to host the Archive of Our Own at archiveofourown.org, if anyone's interested. And I'm really proud of this, actually. I'm totally going to digress and soapbox at you guys for a little bit. I think we have the most women working on an open source software project of any open source software project out there. Our team is more than majority women. It's almost entirely women. Our sysadmins are women. Our designers are women. Our coders are women. And it's something where we've really nurtured a lot of people who had almost no programming experience and have come on and become major contributors to the project. So finding a way to preserve fan fiction in such a way that people can find sort of the classic stories, so that people can keep track of their favorite authors, as they move from fandom to fandom, because it's been so decentralized that a lot of really amazing stories have just been lost. People put up a GeoCities site, GeoCities is completely gone. And a lot of times people sort of wander in and out of fandom drop a few fantastic stories and wander back out again. And you sort of want to find some way to preserve those stories. And that's really the most important thing with fan fiction. In terms of the legal issues, the big problem is, of course, for bidding. Fan bidding suffers a lot from the sort of aggressive hostility of the recording industry that goes after people who use even fair use amounts of audio and does not care whether you're making a remixed piece of work that's transformative and that is fair use. They will use the same sort of sledgehammer on you as they do on the pirate who's just trying to actually sell pirated copies of DVDs on the street, and really kind of making their best customers into criminals, which is really unfortunate. So we're trying to do our best to work with the EFF and the Stanford Fair Use Foundation to put together a set of best practices for fanish bidders and for remix artists in general, to kind of create a set of guidelines that we hope, at least, will make people calm down from the sort of knee-jerk, we're sending you a DMCA pull-down notification. And I generally think that the sort of that people are kind of starting to get it. You know, there are very few people these days who haven't seen a funny YouTube video. And there aren't a lot of people who don't, you know, even on the commercial side, who don't understand the value of getting people so deeply invested in your intellectual property that they want to make essentially free advertising for you. And involve people in your world. I mean, speaking for myself, there is nothing more amazing than getting a piece of Temeraire fan art sent to me, or going on deviantart.com and running around there and seeing all the art that people have posted for Temeraire. It's magical, and knowing that people have written fan fiction for Temeraire, it thrills me. And sometimes I have a hard time understanding, you know, there are people who have a kind of moral objection to it, or a sort of like, this is mine, this is my baby, you don't get to touch it. And that particular objection is not a legal misunderstanding. That's sort of a more emotional kind of reaction. And there, my general response is, you don't get to control how people respond to your work. You know, I would love it if nobody ever left a negative review on Amazon.com for my books. However, I don't get to go on there and say, you were wrong. You were wrong to dislike my book, even if they are wrong, which of course clearly they are. But, you know, that's the risk you take when you share something outside, you know, take something out of your drawer and send it out into the world. And I don't believe in this sort of myth of originality. There is no piece of art that you make that is so unique that it stands completely alone. And if it does, then I don't think anybody could understand it or would care about it. Because we are shaped by the world that we live in and the experiences that we take. And that's what kind of gives us the context for understanding new things.
So do you think that copyright law, properly interpreted, is adequate, or would you like to see long-term changes made to copyright law?
The problems that I have with the current copyright law are partly the extensions of it, that now copyright has basically become infinite, because every time Mickey Mouse gets close to coming out of copyright, Disney basically spends enormous amounts of money to try and get copyright pushed out further. When it was initially started at, I think, 14 years, and now it's up to the life of the author plus 50. And it just really kind of reduces our public domain and impoverishes our popular culture, you know, and it's like, what would Shakespeare be doing right now? He couldn't write Hamlet. You know, he couldn't write Romeo and Juliet because he took those stories from other people. And that's kind of ridiculous, you know? So I feel like that really could use some work, the term of copyright. I think that the criminalization of individuals for doing what is natural, you know, downloading a piece of music to listen to see if they want it and if they want to own it, you know, and the sort of DMCA provisions that basically put enormous power in the hands of corporations to go after individuals who, even if they are in the right, just can't take the risk because, if it's like if they're going to be charged $150,000 every time for every copyright violation, that's a risk that most individual people can't take, even if their work is fair use. But in terms of for fan fiction, I feel like fair use, and I should clarify, my knowledge is really sort of limited to the United States. I am not super familiar with issues outside the United States, and I know that these laws are different all over the world. But fair use, protects transformative work, and it protects non-commercial work. So, for the kind of fan fiction that we're working on, that we're most interested in protecting in the OTW, we feel that those two provisions basically, those criteria really do make it fairly safe. And it's more a question of making people understand. If you're interested in supporting the work of the OTW, the Organization for Transformative Works, our website is at transformativeworks.org. And I totally encourage people to check that out and see our goals and come on board.
So what are some of your newer upcoming projects that people should check out?
So Tongues of Serpents, book 6 in the Temeraire series, is coming out in July. I'll actually be traveling a bit to promote that. I'll be doing appearances in a bunch of cities and at San Diego Comic-Con. So I'm really excited. I love going to San Diego Comic-Con so much. And I have a manga coming out with the wonderful artist Yishan Lee, and that is called Liberty Vocational, and it's the story of a girl who goes to superhero vocational school and how she deals with that. And I am currently working on a young adult trilogy, which is still in the early stages, so I won't say too much about that. And I have a bunch of short stories out. But and the outline for book 7 has just been signed off on by Del Rey, and the Temeraire series will be going to 9 books total.
Okay, great. Well, Naomi Novik, thanks so much for joining us on Geek's Guide to the Galaxy.
Thank you. It was such a pleasure.
And that was our interview. So thanks so much to Naomi for joining us on the show. So first of all, there was just one thing I wanted to clear up. It's sort of a widespread belief that medieval map makers would mark unexplored regions of their maps with the phrase, "Here be dragons." And I believed this for a long time, too. And it's kind of a cool idea, but it turns out it's not true. So there's if you're interested in this, there's a pretty good article on Strange Horizons by Michael Livingston called Modern Medieval Map Myths. And so here's what he says about "Here be dragons." Though the notion that medieval maps marked the edge of the known world with the phrase, "Here be dragons," or tigers or monsters, is widespread in our society, I don't know anyone who has ever figured out how the myth was started. To begin with, let me take the time and space here to provide you the complete list of known medieval maps, including this rubric, in any language. The Lennox Globe, circa 1503-7, which bears the Latin phrase "Hic sunt dracones," i.e., here are dragons, on the east coast of Asia. That's it. So how the phrase ever gains the legendary status that we assume it to have is absolutely mystifying. And actually, on that one globe, the Lennox Globe, when they say "here are dragons," it seems fairly likely that they mean "here are the Komodo dragons." So it's not even meaning, "here are mysterious monsters" or anything like that.
Maybe it was actually just a note from the writer of the map to the artist to actually depict some dragons there to make it look cool, and he just they just printed it on there instead.
I don't know. Komodo dragons are pretty nasty, though.
Yeah, they are pretty scary. I don't know if you've seen that new series on the Discovery Channel called Life, but it's just it's sort of a tour throughout all the sort of animal life on the Earth. And one of the shows they talk about reptiles and stuff, and so they feature the Komodo dragon pretty prominently, and that is a pretty scary animal. I have to say, it's I can see why they call it a dragon.
Yeah, I mean, they don't breathe fire or anything, but apparently their teeth are so long that they are constantly cutting the animal's gums every time they open and close their mouths. And I guess the animal's mouth is so septic that anything it bites, they just bite. They don't even bother really trying to kill stuff. They just bite something once and then just hang out for a while and just assume that whatever they bit is going to die because there's so much bacteria in their mouth.
That's true of me too. So just, stay away from me if I'm, looking feral.
But still, I think I could kill a Komodo dragon. I don't think, if I had an Uzi or something.
But you're not sure you could kill an actual dragon, or I guess the Komodo dragon is the actual dragon, but it's real, But
Yeah.
you couldn't kill a fantasy dragon. You're saying with an Uzi, even with an Uzi.
Oh, I don't know. Well, I have actually killed a lot of dragons. Mostly imaginary, video game dragons.
Sure.
But I think that counts.
Yeah, why not?
I think that
you're a dragon slayer.
I think that gives me some sort of expertise. I think that's going to be a consistent theme on this episode, is just how to kill dragons and different kinds of dragons. And that was making me think of, I saw an interview with Tom Shippey, the author of Tolkien, author of The Century, where he was talking about when Tolkien was writing The Hobbit. He knew that this dragon Smaug was going to be killed, but he had to figure out how it was going to happen. And actually, at the time, there weren't a whole lot of sources about how you might kill a dragon to draw on. So there was Beowulf, but, Beowulf dies in the course of killing that dragon, so that's not a good model to use. And then another one is, Sigurd killing the dragon Fafnir. And this is definitely, if were going to have to kill a dragon, this is one thing I would think about doing. So what Sigurd does is he digs a hole in the ground and then waits for the dragon to pass overhead and then stabs it from below.
That's pretty clever.
And of course, Smaug in The Hobbit is killed by an expert archer with a lucky arrow who knows about the unarmored spot on Smaug's chest. So those are two ways to kill dragons. But some of the dragons I've killed in video games, we can't go a show without mentioning King's Quest. So I'm just going to mention in King's Quest 1, you face off against this small dragon, and you have to throw a bucket full of water into his mouth and extinguish his fire. And the dragon is so mortified that he slinks off. And then in King's Quest 3, you use a magic spell to summon a lightning storm, and then a lightning bolt strikes this three-headed dragon, which is the tallest thing in the area.
I would think if you had access to sort of modern equipment, like a heat-seeking missile would work really great for a fire-breathing dragon, because it could just go right down its throat and into its belly where all that fire is. And then it would blow up on the inside, because actually even a missile to the outside of a dragon would probably actually kind of hurt it a lot, I would think. Admittedly, a fire-breathing dragon probably is very resistant to fire, but still, it's a missile. It explodes. That would probably hurt, but it would hurt even more from the inside.
In Dungeons and Dragons, they have a world called Dragonlance, where it's all about riding dragons and having lances, in fact, on your dragon. But actually how I first learned about Dragonlance is there was this computer game called Heroes of the Lance that was sort of based on the original Dragonlance adventure module, where you explore the ruins of Zack Tisseroth. And it was kind of a crap game, actually. This was back in the early days of PC gaming. And kids today, they don't realize what we had to put up with. They've never seen a CGA screen. But let me just explain to you what that means. So on a PC, it used to be you would have games in CGA, which means they only had 4 colors: black, white, turquoise, and magenta.
I believe it's cyan.
Cyan?
Yeah, not turquoise.
Oh, well, okay. It's sort of light blue and a sort of light purplish. And if you can imagine just those 4 colors splashed together, it's not a pretty picture. And so you would be exploring these dungeons, and oftentimes I would just, fall into a pit or something. And you're like, oh, that was a pit? I couldn't tell because the graphics, it's kind of hard to make out what it is when everything's a mixture of those 4 colors. But so, in that game, you have to fight this big black dragon at the end. And this is kind of one of the ways in which it's just kind of a crap game, is you have this crystal staff that one of the characters has. And if you hit the dragon with that, it dies. And if you hit it with anything else, it's impossible to kill. So
that makes sense.
Once you figure that out,
your memory for things you played when you were a child just astonishes me. No matter how many times I hear you recount in vivid detail your adventures from King's Quest or these other games, I just can't fathom how you remember that stuff in such vivid detail.
It's just, it's all in what you care about,
Right.
What's important to you, what your priorities are, you might say. There was also an NES, the original Nintendo system game called Dragon Warrior. That's even got dragon right in the title. You fight a dragon at the end of that one.
Well, it would be kind of a letdown if you didn't fight a dragon in that one, wouldn't it?
Well, yeah, those games, there were a lot of letdowns playing those games, though. Like Heroes of the Lance, on the cover it has a picture of you riding a dragon, flying through the air with a lance, and you never do that in the game. Right. So you can never tell with those games.
I remember, a couple of games where the dragons were actually really cool. Like, in the Neverwinter Nights series, there was a bunch of, we asked Naomi if she had ever worked on any of those sort of fan-created modules that you could download. And, she said no, but I mean, I remembered, after I played through the whole game, the original game that you buy, once I finished playing that original adventure, I went and I downloaded a bunch of those fan-created modules. And obviously the quality of those was variable, but I remember one that was like, it was like amazing. It was like so well written. I mean, I kind of suspected that maybe Naomi had written it, after I learned that she worked on the game. There was like a scene like right at the beginning of it where like you're actually flying on a dragon, which is like something that they didn't even have in the regular game. So I was like, how did they even do that? And there was other things in there with dragons too that was very cool. That's based on Dungeons and Dragons, and there's another Dungeons and Dragons game too that I remember called Pool of Radiance. Oh yeah, do you remember that?
Oh hell yeah.
And if I recall correctly, at the end of that, you fight a dragon too, right? It's his name is like
Tyrant Thraxus.
Yeah. It's like it's a crazy name for a dragon, but I always loved it. I remember that there wasn't any of that stupid stuff where like you had to have some special weapon to kill. You didn't need that special crystal staff or whatever to kill the dragon at the end of this. It's like you just had to sort of strategize and figure out what you can do with your characters to actually survive the final battle.
Well, there was actually a sequel to Pool. I mean, I played Pool of Radiance. Actually, I was never able to beat that one because then the sequel came out, and I was more interested in playing the sequel. But the sequel was called Curse of the Azure Bonds.
Oh, I remember it well.
And that's one of my all-time favorite games.
Mm-hmm.
And it was definitely the best written of any D&D computer game I ever played. The plot is that there are these 5 evil organizations, and they all need a party of adventurers to serve as pawns, and so they kidnap you and tattoo you. And these tattoos are magical, and they kind of make you the slaves of these 5 evil organizations. And you have to kind of explore the land and find some way to kill them all. And each time you kill one of the bad guys, one of the tattoos fades away. And so one of the places you go is this sort of wizard's fortress. And when you walk in, he has a pet Dracolich, which is sort of a huge undead skeletal dragon.
Mm-hmm.
And so this thing comes at you, and you're like, there's no freaking way, my characters can fight this thing. And then it just says, either come with me or die. And so you're like, okay, I'll come with you. And so he leads you up to the top of the tower, and then he leaves. And there's a wizard, and some stuff goes down, and you end up having to fight your way down through level after level after level of this fortress. And finally, you fight the wizard and kill him and get away. And then you've escaped. And you're like, wow, phew, I didn't have to fight that Dracolich. But then he's like following you. And there's no way you can avoid fighting him, and he just comes out of the woods. Sooner or later, he comes out of the woods and says, you killed my master, and now I'll have my revenge. And you're like, oh, crap. And, you remember in those games, like, when one of your characters dies, it goes like, and there's, like, the red skull and crossbones appears over them. And so fighting that Dracolich, so frustrating. It's just like the fight starts, and, it's like, Dracolich breathes fire. And your character's just like, and you're stuck because he's following you, so it's not like you can just go off somewhere and build up your characters. You have to keep doing this fight over and over until you beat him. But it was very memorable and a sort of cool storytelling thing where you have a powerful villain like that following you around.
Yeah, I mean that was actually one of the problems that there always was with games like D&D or video games like this, is that the dragons are really cool, right? But they're so hard. I mean, they're so powerful that like you can only really ever expect the characters to face them once they've really sort of advanced very far. So it's like, what you really want to do is fight dragons. I mean, like Dungeons and Dragons, D&D, one of the D stands for dragons. I want to fight dragons, but then, you have to play for a long time before you're actually good enough to be able to handle fighting a dragon. So, I mean, that's kind of unfortunate, but it does make them much more awesome when you actually do have to, deal with them.
Yeah, and that's one of those like weird things you just kind of have to go with the game dynamics of Dungeons and Dragons. You're like, well, I've killed 10,000 trolls, so now I can kill a dragon with one hit,
Right.
It's like, what? It all makes sense in Dungeons and Dragons world. But in Dragon Warrior, I was going to say you fight this dragon at the end, and before you fight him, he offers you a chance. It's sort of like the Emperor in Star Wars, where he's like, join me and together we'll rule the world.
Mm-hmm.
And if you say yes, you just die instantly. It's kind of lame. And so it's really lame if you've spent hours and hours and hours getting up to him, and then you accidentally hit the wrong button, and then you just die. And you're like, no! There goes the last 4 hours of my life. But There was something sort of intriguing about that. I always sort of would fantasize. I mean, obviously, like a game with that much memory, nothing really cool is going to happen. But I always sort of fantasize that you can say, okay, sure, I'll join you, and then he like sends you out on missions with a whole army of monsters and stuff, and you go around burning villages and things. There's sort of moments like that in video games where possibilities like that open up, and you just know that the game isn't sophisticated enough to allow any kind of actual branching of the plot, but it sort of haunts you. Well, what if you actually could do something like that? There was another game. Did you ever play Loom? It was from LucasArts. It came out around the same time as Monkey Island.
No, I don't think so.
This is just one of the most amazing games I've ever seen. So, in most adventure games, you would pick up items and put them together and use them in different ways. And so Loom was completely different. You don't ever pick up any items. You just have your magic wand, and you have to play through the whole game just with stuff you can do with your magic wand. And so how it works is the magic wand, when you see certain things happening in the world, it causes musical notes to play on your magic wand. So, like, for example, near the beginning, you're on this island, and you have to swim to the mainland, and there's this tornado in the ocean blocking your way, and it causes a certain sequence of notes to play on your magic wand, and that's the twisting song. And so if you use your magic wand and play those notes in reverse at the tornado, it untwists it and it disappears, and then you can keep going. But so then you also know the twisting and the untwisting songs. So if you encounter anything else in the world that needs some twisting, you know what to do. But so there's like a part where you find a spinning wheel that turns, that spins straw into gold, and then so it teaches you a song. And so then when you encounter a dragon, you walk into this dragon's horde. And so there's the dragon sitting on all its gold. And so you use the reverse song to turn all its gold into straw. And then it inadvertently sets all the straw on fire and kind of freaks out and flies out. So that's another way you can take care of those pesky dragons. And so speaking of Dungeons & Dragons, if you've ever played Dungeons & Dragons, you'll know that different colors of dragons breathe different kinds of stuff. So I thought it would be fun to give John a pop quiz. Test out, if you see different kinds of dragons, what kind of stuff can you expect them to breathe at you? And this will be according to my Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd Edition Monstrous Compendium Volume 1. So this is going to be the final arbiter, because I know John's going to maybe protest some of these.
I'm ready.
Okay, so going in alphabetical order, if a black dragon comes at you, what can you expect it to be breathing?
Acid.
Hey, all right, good. How about a blue dragon?
Electricity.
Wow.
Lightning bolts.
Nice. Yeah. Okay. Oh, this is going to be a little tricky. Okay, how about a brass dragon?
When you get into the metallic dragons, that's just cheating, because those aren't real dragons. The only real dragons are the primary color dragons. Everybody knows that. But as they started expanding the dragons to different things, and I don't know. It just got to be a bit crazy. But like all the metallic dragons are good dragons, right? So I didn't have much reason to know what they breathe because they weren't enemies. I know my enemy, not potential allies. I mean, the good dragons were never around when you needed them anyway. But brass dragon, let's see. Pennies? I don't know.
This says it has actually 2 breath weapons, a cone of sleep gas. Or a cloud of blistering heat. That was a little tricky. I won't penalize you for not knowing that one.
Oh, okay, thanks.
Boy, some of these are all tricky. I don't know. I'll just read what some of these are. Some of these metallic guys. Bronze is repulsion gas or lightning. Copper is slow gas. That means it slows you down. Or acid. And gold is fire or chlorine gas. I wouldn't expect you to know that one.
Chlorine gas doesn't actually seem like something a good dragon would breathe, right? I mean, that's like pretty nasty. I mean, that's caustic stuff.
Well, what if you have a pool or something? And it could come in handy. It's like, yo, gold dragon pool boy, get out of here. Get those leaves out of there while you're at it.
Oh my god, that's like a Robot Chicken sketch.
Okay, green dragon.
Poison.
Yep. Very good. Red dragon.
Fire, of course.
Yep. Silver dragon.
Yeah, what's another one of those metallic ones? I don't know.
Cold and paralyzation gas. These are some pretty sophisticated gases produced in the bellies of these dragons.
Yeah, I have to say.
Okay, and finally, last but not least, white dragon.
Oh, cold, right?
Yeah, ice.
Ice, yeah. I forgot about the white dragons. Actually, isn't there a platinum dragon? I thought there was.
Not in my Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd Edition Monsters Compendium Volume 1.
Maybe I'm just thinking because there was platinum money in Dungeons and Dragons that because as everyone knows, platinum is worth the most, and then gold, right? And then like what, electrum, and then silver, and I don't remember. Copper maybe, yeah.
Yeah, well, there's like a million. There's actually a bunch of other dragons in there, but they're even more obscure. They're like the Eastern dragons and stuff. So.
That's one of the cool things in Naomi Novik's series, actually, is that there are different types of dragons in there as well. I mean, they're not categorized as simply as in D&D, whereas, like, by color, but there are, like, sort of distinct different breeds, and they have different abilities, and different ones breathe different sorts of things as well. So, I mean, that was very cool to me, coming out of D&D to have the dragons like that, but have it feel original and not just copying what was in D&D,
Mm-hmm. So let's see. So let's talk a little bit about this How to Train Your Dragon movie.
Yep.
Actually, I noticed before I went to see this that it had a 98% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes.
That's pretty good.
And so actually, as I was driving over to the theater, I was wondering, is this going to be the best dragon riding movie of all time? And then I was thinking, well, wait, what are its...
Right.
What's the competition?
That's a good question.
So, like, the sort of dragon movies that have kind of come to mind, just sort of off the top of my head, are Dragon Slayer. This is an old one. Did you ever see this one?
I did, but I don't remember it very well.
I sort of remember this. I don't think I ever actually saw this whole movie. It would just sort of be on TV when I was a kid, and I would catch bits and pieces of it. I remember it having sort of pretty good special effects for the time.
Right.
But I don't know if I would really call it a good movie or anything. And then Dragonheart.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever see this one?
I did, yeah. I don't remember it being particularly good, but it was quite a long time ago, so I'm sure it hasn't aged very well. I know the dragon sort of, isn't it like Sean Connery's voice or something? Yeah. It's like, that seems like just I can't imagine actually watching that now and thinking that was good.
Yeah, even at the time I remember thinking it was kind of embarrassing. The premise, I guess, is that it's a young wannabe knight makes a deal with a dragon where he'll pretend to fight it, to chase it off, and it'll be kind of a lucrative scam for the two of them. Mm-hmm. And I guess this is very similar to a Roger Zelazny story called The George Business. So lots of people online seem to be suggesting that the writers of Dragonheart were, shall we say, inspired by this Roger Zelazny story. Actually, this Roger Zelazny story was actually outright plagiarized once by a high school kid who submitted it to a newspaper contest and won $1,000. He got first prize, but then people were like, "Hey, I've read this story before."
Well, I'm glad he got caught.
Well, I'm glad he got first prize.
Well, yeah, that's.
I would feel bad if he got if he got third, if this Roger Zelazny story got a third prize in it.
Right.
So actually, Zelazny has a lot of kind of cool, kind of novel takes on dragons. He has another story I really like called The Monster and the Maid. It's sort of a short, funny story. I can't really say anything about that one without spoiling it, but people should definitely check that one out. And then actually in some of the Amber books, there are some lines about dragons I kind of like. So in The Guns of Avalon, there's this line where he says, "The only dragon we encountered was lame and limped away quickly to hide, singeing daisies as it panted and wheezed." And I've always just liked that image of the dragon, the wheezing dragon burning daisies. Mm-hmm. And then in Blood of Amber, they're walking around the city of Amber, and he says, "An old man walking a tiny green dragon on a chain leash touched his hat to me as I passed and said, 'Good evening.'" I've always liked that image of like the dragon, like a little poodle, that you walk around in the evening on a leash.
Yeah.
Let's see, but getting back to movies, I mean, there was the Aragon movie I actually never saw.
Huh.
I never saw that.
I never saw it either.
I also never heard anything good, like a single good thing about it.
My niece, who actually loved the book, even says that the movie is terrible and can't encourage anyone to watch it for any reason.
Mm. And so the probably the best dragon movie I can think of is Reign of Fire with Christian Bale and Matthew McConaughey, which is quite good for about half an hour. Then it really goes off the rails. But did you see this one?
I did, yeah. And actually, I was thinking about that, and I was thinking that I remembered it being kind of fun, but I didn't remember it quite being good. So that what you're describing kind of sounds about right. Like maybe
Yeah,
maybe
no,
there's a half hour of good movie in there somewhere.
it's sort of a post-apocalyptic thing where dragons are real, but they were kind of in hibernation for 1,000 years or something. So we all just assumed that they were imaginary, and then they come out and burn up everything. And so there's a bunch of, a couple fairly young guys and some kids who are kind of camped out in this ruin, hiding from the dragons, and they're the only survivors as far as they know. And then a team of dragon hunters show up who have tanks and airplanes and stuff. And so all you start watching it, and it is really cool. I mean, it's sort of the first half hour or so of a really good movie, and then it just kind of turns into like a stupid, there's like a king dragon. If they kill that, all the dragons will die or something. But that really is like the best dragon movie that I can think of. So I think I'm gonna have to give it to How to Train Your Dragon as the best dragon,
right?
The best like movie focused on dragons that I can think of. And well, I don't know John. What we haven't talked since we've seen this. So what did you think of How to Train Your Dragon?
No, I really liked it. I mean, it's. I think the only like negative thing I had to say about it was something we sort of talk about in the history episode is that there were some bad accents. It focuses on this group of like sort of Vikings, and a bunch of the Vikings are voiced by people who apparently have Scottish accents, and it's like just obviously Scottish, and I'm like this, and it just kind of annoyed me because I'm like it's just so wrong. I mean, don't even try if you're gonna get it that wrong. I mean, that's just a different accent, But no, I mean, other than that, I mean, and the thing is that those are all background characters really. So like the main character, like he isn't annoying himself, and although he has a stupid name, right? Like what's his name?
Hiccup, right?
And no, I mean, I thought it was a lot of fun. I like the way the kid has this relationship with the dragon, and he sort of has to. It's like this coming of age story along the same times, and it does a lot of cool stuff with the mythology of the dragons too. I thought, like, I mean, there's different kinds of dragons in that as well, and they were interestingly different, and there's a lot of cool visuals, like him flying around on the dragon and stuff. I thought it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I really liked the designs of the dragons. It was a very, there was nothing really wrong with it. I have a bunch of, just to give us something to talk about, I'm going to pick some nits, but
sure.
It is just quite a good, enjoyable, kids animated movie. But yeah, like the Hiccup thing, that kind of bugged me because like it's just kind of a stupid name, but it doesn't seem like the name, because we see his father for a lot of the movie, and he doesn't seem like the kind of guy who would name his kid Hiccup, right?
Right.
You would think he would name his kid Thrasher or Dragon's Bane or something like that.
That would actually kind of make more sense, wouldn't it? I mean, because it would just make him more of a joke. Like if he had a name like Thrasher, and he's just like this little weenie who like can't live up to his father's idea of being a warrior and a man.
No, I think that would be funny if he's just like, you guys, you can just call me Ted.
Yeah.
And his dad's like, no, your name is Thrasher.
Right.
But sort of. It seemed to me like I kind of had some of the same issues with this that I had with Shrek. And I really like Shrek, but it seems to me that the message is muddled in a way. Because, you know what I'm going to say?
Well, go ahead.
Well, because it seems like the message of Shrek is supposed to be that it's not what's outside that counts, but what's inside. And, you shouldn't just judge people by their appearances. And an ogre, who has a good heart is great, and it's better to have a good heart than to be pretty, which is what happens with the end at the princess. And so all that is good, but then for the whole movie they make fun of the prince guy for being short. And so it's kind of like it's like, don't be superficial and judge people by what's outside, and that guy's short, what a joke. And it's just like it seems like the film is just at war with itself on that point.
Well, what I was going to say with How to Train Your Dragon actually is that there's kind of a not great message in there, in that like they're like enslaving these dragons, right? I mean,
yeah. So that's like kind of part of my something I wondered about. Like, do all these dragons really just want to be like pets for these Vikings? And
right.
I mean, a lot of those Vikings are really big. I mean, would you want one of those Vikings riding around on your back all day? But just in terms of the themes, it seems like. Because how it starts out is, it seems like it's gonna the message is it's gonna be like, there are dragons and we just assume that they're evil, but actually they're kind of like your mom's always telling you about bumblebees. Just leave the bumblebees alone and they won't bother you. And so once you realize that dragons are they're basically okay, then we'll all get along. And so you have a human, like a Viking kid, and like a dragon, and they kind of bring their two species together. And that seems like the way it's going. And that would make perfect sense. I mean, it would be kind of predictable, but then like 2/3 of the way through the movie, it turns out that there's this huge evil dragon, you know, who they can't make peace with. And it seems, and actually that was like my favorite part of the movie, because that was the first time I was really surprised. And that was just kind of a cool visual where all the dragons are swooping into this big volcano and dropping stuff into the maw of this gigantic monster. You know, but then there's this big evil dragon that they have to kill. And like, it seems like the movie, it's kind of fighting against, it has like these Hollywood formula things it has to do that kind of make that kind of confuse the message. You know, there's been, you know, this kid, and his turning point is when he realizes that he, you know, you can make friends with the dragons, and he has this dad who just wants to kill dragons all the time. But then at the end, the kid has to come in and kill a dragon.
Right.
And, you know, it's just kind of weird. I mean, and it was not clear to me whether the big dragon was actually evil or not. Mm-hmm. Or is he just like some really big dragon and he just needs a lot to eat, and he's kind of doing the best he can, you know, by enslaving all the other dragons and making them feed him. But could he actually just eat less, do you think? Could he go on a diet? Yeah, could he go on a diet, or do we have to kill this guy?
I guess so. If the film is going to have a climax, I guess you have to.
Yeah, well, that was kind of part of the thing. Is it seems like in order to get the climax in under the running time, a lot of sort of weird stuff had to happen. Like when his dad says, you know, the dad's like, "You know where the nest is? We're going." Mm-hmm. And Hiccup says, "Well, wait, don't go. There's this gigantic dragon that you can't possibly fight against." And his dad's like, "I don't need to hear any of this garbage." You're like, well, wait, if I were going to go attack some dragons, I might want to spend a minute listening to the kid who's been there and get some intelligence on it, you know.
Well, there's big stupid Vikings, you know. They never planned anything out ahead. And
also, you know, he's like, "Wait, you can train these dragons and ride them and shoot fireballs? That's outrageous." You know, it's like, wait, you know, you're like a military leader, you know.
Right.
Might you want to maybe use that?
Yeah, that wouldn't come in handy at all.
I mean, what I thought would be kind of cool is if, you know, you have this fight between pacifism and militarism, and so Hiccup realizes that you can make friends with the dragons, and his dad just wants to kill the dragons. But then it turns out that there's this big evil dragon that they have to kill, and Hiccup doesn't want to kill it because he thinks he can make friends with it in a misguided way. And so he tries to make friends with it, and then realizes, then sort of gets himself in trouble, and his dad has to come in and fight the dragon and help him out. And so then at the end, it turns out that, you know, you can't have excessive pacifism or excessive militarism. You have to, you know, that the world is a complicated place, and we need diplomats and we need soldiers, and the father and son realize that they have something to learn from each other.
That would work out pretty well. Yeah. Thanks for ruining the movie for me. Well, maybe you should write some children's literature that has such sophisticated thought processes put into it.
Well, maybe I will. Another thing I didn't like was I just really did not like Astrid at all.
Oh, yeah. No, she's kind of annoying. I agree. Like, I didn't get like why really he would be so enamored with trying to impress her.
Right, and it's like exactly the same thing as like I was saying with Shrek, is that the message is supposed to be, oh, this Hiccup kid, you know, he doesn't meet all the stereotypes of what somebody of his gender ought to be, but he's got a good heart, and if you just look below the surface, he's got potential, right, which is all good. But then when it comes to the female love interest, right, you're like, wait, why is he attracted to her? And from the point of view of the screenwriters, they're like, well, who wouldn't be? She's gorgeous and blonde and skinny, right? And it's just like, you know, why is there such a big disconnect between the message that we seem to be getting when it comes to Hiccup and the message we seem to be getting when it comes to Astrid? And then also, you know, like if she had been nice to him ever, that would be one thing, or if there was, you know, just stuff to like about her in terms of her treatment of other people or something. But she's just so like mean and condescending to him until he becomes a big celebrity, and then she totally changes her mind, you know. And I don't know, that just,
well, she was the only girl in the movie, wasn't she? So by default, she was his love interest.
Well, there was the female twin.
Oh, right, yeah.
But that's still, yeah, well, that's not really a good reason for me, you know, to like be really invested in this romance. Well, it's like, well, she's the only girl his age on the entire island. But so here's my advice for Hiccup. Hiccup, first of all, change your name. And you've got a dragon, right? So just get out of there. You know, get out of that like podunk Viking town.
Go to the big city.
Go to the big city or the tropics, anywhere, and find a girl who appreciates you for who you are and who's going to stick by you regardless of whether or not you've got a dragon to ride. Right.
I agree with you. That's good advice, Dave. Oh, but speaking of movies, I think movies like How to Train Your Dragon and Avatar actually will really sort of pave the way for some new great dragon movies in the future. Like I was reading some article that was talking about, Anne McCaffrey's Pern series, bringing that to the silver screen at last. I mean, it's been this iconic dragon series in novels for a long time, and or I should say, this iconic series in literature for a long time, but it's never been adapted to film. But I mean, it would probably be impossible previously because it's all about riding dragons, and so the dragons would have to be on screen almost all the time. But what we see in Avatar and in How to Train Your Dragon, I mean, that kind of shows us that we could see it either as an animated feature like How to Train Your Dragon, or as a sort of live action movie like Avatar, and it could be really amazing. So I think there's going to be a lot more competition for the title of best dragon movie in the future here.
Like the George R. R. Martin's Song of Ice and Fire is coming to HBO,
right?
And there are dragons in that, and so sort of like we were saying with The Hobbit is that's something I worry about. That's one of the harder things to do is to mix the dragons into the live action stuff. I really hope they're able to do that well. It's funny, actually, if you read the dedication to Storm of Swords, it says, "For Phyllis, who made me put the dragons in." I guess his original, he wanted to do fantasy that felt more like historical fiction, and so I guess the original concept was just to do a fantasy, but with no magic at all. And she convinced him to put in the magic stuff, so hence the dedication, to which I'm very grateful to her, because I really like the magic stuff. But yeah, it is going to be a challenge bringing it to the screen. But so let's see. So I mean, speaking of dragon news, there's this Nightshade anthology coming up called Wings of Fire, edited by Jonathan Strahan, that people should definitely check out. Like, it's got the Roger Zelazny story, The George Business, that I mentioned earlier. It's got a story by Naomi Novik. It's got a story by Holly Black that we interviewed 2 episodes back, along with just a bunch of other big name authors: George R. R. Martin, Orson Scott Card, Ursula Le Guin, and so on.
Including the first of the Anne McCaffrey dragon stories. It originally began with this story, Weir Search, as a novella back in the 60s, and then eventually grew to be, encompass this big series that includes many novels and stuff. Yeah, this anthology actually also includes one of my favorite dragon stories, mainly because it's like this completely different treatment of dragons. But, The Man Who Painted the Dragon Grial by Lucius Shepard.
There's also a series by James Maxey that starts with a novel called Bitterwood, where it's set in a world where it's kind of ruled by a sort of government of dragons, a sort of tyranny of dragons, and the humans have to rebel and try to overthrow the tyranny.
Is that what you call a group of dragons? A tyranny of dragons? That's cool.
It is now.
Nice. Trademark that. And actually, you speaking of trademarking, I mean, you have your own pretty great dragon story.
Oh, thank you.
Blood of Virgins. Do you want to talk about that a little bit, or?
Yeah, sure. I mean, this is my dragon story. I'm quite fond of it. It appeared on. It's actually, you can read it on my website, and it was episode 88 of Escape Pod if anyone wants to check it out. But it's set in sort of a surreal, alternate, contemporary world where dragons are available as a high-end luxury transportation option, and that the fuel that they use to keep going is the blood of virgins. And so the main character is a freshman in college, and he's a virgin, and he kind of develops this sort of paranoid fear that the dragons are kind of watching him and are out for his blood. I think it's kind of a cool, different take on dragons. I really like the story, so people check it out if you're interested.
Yeah, and so some other sort of unusual treatments of dragons that I wanted to mention. Michael Stackpole actually has a new series coming out this fall from Nightshade called the Crown Colony series, and the first one's called At the Queen's Command. And I mean, I don't know much about it yet, but it's described as a high fantasy retelling of the American Revolutionary War with dragons. So so I'm really looking forward to that, just because I like Naomi Novik's series so much, and I saw that as like such a sort of rich playground to sort of explore different treatments of dragons in, like, just sort of taking different historical periods and adding dragons to them and seeing how it goes. And so I mean, I'm just curious. I'm very curious to see what Stackpole does with it, because like the thing is, like with Naomi, being so open to the idea of fan fiction, I kind of wish that, I mean, I would be kind of curious to read fan fiction that was really well, that was, if it was well written, but set in her world, just because like it's such a rich milieu that like I want to know what's going on like in other parts of the world, because I mean, there's America in that world too, so like, why I want to know what's going on there. And there's a couple other anthologies as well I thought I'd mention. One of our listeners, Charles Tan, sent me this Philippine book called A Time for Dragons, which is subtitled a Philippine anthology of draconic fiction. And so it's it's all Filipino writers. That might be harder to track down, but I mean, if you're really interested in that kind of thing, you could I'm sure it wouldn't be too difficult to find. And then DAW actually just released a new anthology called The Dragon and the Stars, edited by Derwin Mack and Eric Choi, and it's all like writers of Chinese descent, writing different dragon stories inspired by Chinese legend and stuff like that. We haven't talked much about the origin of where dragons come from or anything, and I mean, I think most people probably know that dragons sort of come from like Chinese mythology and stuff. But so I guess this anthology is sort of taking it back to the roots where it came from, rather than the sort of modern idea of dragons that like Dave and I have, at least which is based mostly on Dungeons and Dragons.
Okay, well, I just wanted to close with a quote that I really like. This is from G.K. Chesterton, and he says, "Fairy tales are not true. Fairy tales are more than true, not because they tell us that dragons exist, but because they tell us that dragons can be beaten." Especially if you have a blue crystal staff. That's not part of the original quote. I added that.
Or a heat-seeking missile.
And that was our show. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. If you'd like to share your thoughts about any of the topics we discussed today, we'd love to hear from you. Just go to tor.com and click on podcasts, and then Geek's Guide to the Galaxy episode 17, and post a comment there. And be sure to join us next week when we'll interview Eric Garcia, co-writer of the new film Repo Man, based on his novel The Repossession Mambo, about a corporation that violently repossesses the artificial organs of people who can't keep up on their payments. See you then.
The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a production of Tor.com. For this episode's show notes, or to subscribe to this podcast, visit Tor.com and click on Podcasts. For more information about your hosts, visit JohnJosephAdams.com or DavidBarrKirtley.com. Music and voiceover produced by Deadsville 9 Entertainment. If you've enjoyed this program, tell your friends. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thank you for listening.